everybody. Welcome to tonight's show. I'm Mike Griffith. You're watching the Ingles on the Beat show, and I'm joined by Georgia Senior Deputy Athletics Director, Josh Brooks. Josh, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, and here we are. It's game week, Josh. I guess I'll ask you. We've all kind of had our trials and tribulations of this offseason. I know you've been right smack dab in the middle of it. Working over there in the Georgia Athletics Department. A lot of planning has gone into this. If you could kind of take me through, give me the crib notes version of what Josh Brooks' offseason looked like when March 12th happened. I was talking to Greg McGarity that night in Nashville, and Greg was explaining, Mike, the key is to try to get as close back to normal as we can in a very unnormal time. A lot has happened since then, Josh. If you can kind of take me through the steps of that.
Wow, March 12th, that feels like, multiple years ago. I know I've gotten grayer since then. I know this beard was a lot browner back then, but yeah, it feels like years ago, and it all started then when the cancellation of the basketball tournament and moving forward, we canceled our track team was already in New Mexico, ready to compete in indoor nationals. We had to send them home. And then began this whole process of everything canceling in the spring and thinking forward to the fall and saying, what's going to happen, and everybody was theorizing what's going to happen. Are we going to play? Are we not going to play? You get the question every day: Are we going to play? Are we going to have fans? Are we not going to have fans? And for a lot of the time, we didn't know. We didn't know what the answer would be. But I'm an eternal optimist, and I believed we would always play. And because I had no other option but to think about, okay, we're going to play, and I've got to work through scenarios of it being full capacity, zero capacity. Social distance, or some hybrid of that. So really the process for me started thinking back, okay, I've got to develop a plan that if social distancing has to be maintained in Sanford Stadium, in all our venues, Stegman, Turner Complex, everything, how do we pull that off? So that's where the process started. And that really started for me kind of really early in April and May, because we were all locked at home, and I was like, I better start this now and not wait.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, there was so many ups and downs. I was trying to cover this story, looking back at Greg Sankey and just how methodical he was with the approach. I don't know, Josh, I don't know what these other conferences were doing, but the communication clearly couldn't have been the same in the Big Ten and the Pac-12 as it was the SEC. I know that Greg McGarity was involved in a lot of these calls. How close were you to those calls, the weekly calls with Sankey, and how in tune were you with what was going on in that blow-by-blow basis as the offseason took place?
Yeah, so early on, Greg, they would invite some of the deputies to sit in on those calls. And I was fortunate enough that, when the scheduling conflicts would come up and there'd be a meeting Greg couldn't get out of, I'd be able to sit in for him in a couple of those AD meetings. And I can tell you that without a doubt, the leadership of Greg Sankey is unparalleled across the country. His patience, his wisdom, he's able to see, 3 steps ahead, and just encouraging the patience. And that's what really gave me hope and really gave me disappointment watching some of the other conferences move so quickly to make decisions when you're saying, guys, we don't have to make a decision right now. We can postpone it. We can reevaluate. We don't have to make this call right now. And you saw those other conferences almost make a knee-jerk reaction and cancel their seasons for the time being, while we just stayed the course and said we can postpone, we can reevaluate, and in that postponement, we will firm up our plans. And we needed that time, honestly, because people could say, well, you had all summer, but there's so many logistical things you had to work through. You'd be amazed every detail on who's in the bubble, who's can be on the field, who cannot. How are you going to handle the fans? How are you going to handle the student athletes, coaches, staff, contact tracing? I mean, there were so many things that had to be refined that giving us that time to push back to that start that we did gave us time to really hone in and perfect the plan for this last opening weekend.
Yeah, and of course, Georgia was, planning it out as well. I mean, I remember the President Moorhead put together this committee. You guys filed this, I don't know, it seemed ridiculous to me, 250-page report on policy for COVID-19 and reintroduction, resocialization. I'm sure you were in the middle of that as well. I know we got a lot of fans that are curious, and they're all wanting to know, Josh, hey, what's it going to be like? I mean, first of all, I know this. If you don't have a ticket, then don't think about tailgating on campus. That's what I do know. Somehow tickets are attached to parking, which is attached to the term tailgating, which we'll use very loosely. I'll let you explain the procedure for the fans that will be able to gather around literally the tailgates of their cars, but really maybe not anywhere else on campus, right?
So not to play off of what Kirby always says, but keep the main thing, right? So the
That's
main thing
right.
for us is playing this football game, getting these 4 home games we have and accomplishing that. So we know that a typical game day brings in thousands of people who don't have a ticket to just hang out on campus, tailgate, have fun. We really had to do a good job of, if we were going to be at 20% in the stadium, and that manages, if that's 18 to 22,000 people, we didn't need an additional 10 to 20 on campus complicating things. So we thought of processes of how can we do that? What's the best way to pull that off? So the best way to do that is just saying, look, if you're going to get into a parking lot, you got to show a ticket. You've got to show, the majority of our parking lots are managed through our control, and you have the donors have parking passes. There's some that are bought day of, there's some that are free, but in all of those lots, you got to have a parking pass to get in that lot. And that's going to control it to where we're focusing on the 20 to 22% that are going to be here, them occupying those spots, so we don't have additional people showing up that could further complicate the gatherings or larger crowds that we're trying to avoid. And I know we caught a little flack about the topic of tailgating. I said, okay, you said no tailgating, but you said we can have gatherings. Okay, all right, what does that mean? So no tailgating, no tents, no tables, the big setups, no anything that promotes gathering. We're asking everybody to be responsible and come in their group. And look, if the Brooks family is coming from 3 hours away and they drive in and they get to the lot when it opens, let's say 4:30 for this case, and gates don't open until 5:30, or if you just don't want to go in until 6:30 or 6:45, you can hang around your car, pop your trunk, have some refreshments, hang around your vehicle in your group. What we don't want is the big setups, the tents, the tailgates, the grills that promote the gatherings of large groups. So I know people say, well, tailgating is technically that. Okay, I get that. But we're trying to give people a little relief because we know that some people don't want to just park and go straight to the stadium. They want to hang out a little bit. So it's almost like what I've experienced when I'm going to a Braves game, and it's not the true Georgia football tailgating, but it's, hey, let's hang around the car, have a couple drinks, and then head into the stadium from there. So it was our best attempt to offer a solution or a compromise without promoting the large social gatherings, which we're trying to avoid.
Right. We're talking to Josh Brooks. He's the Senior Deputy Athletics Director at the University of Georgia. Josh has been integral to the planning for the COVID-19 protocol. My producer, Michael Carvel, a moment ago put up a picture of Sanford Stadium, and you can kind of see where the seat backs are. Josh, you had you said you put some of your college mathematics education to work here when you were doing this layout, trying to maximize as many folks in that stadium as you could possibly get while still maintaining that 6-foot minimum that we look for with COVID protocol. Can you talk a little bit more about that stadium layout? And Michael, if you could throw that stadium picture back up again, I thought it was really interesting, that layout that we see at Sanford Stadium for this Saturday night game, 7:30 between the hedges against Auburn.
Yeah, so it was 2 clear objectives for me. It was, the first priority was maintaining social distancing outside of your blocks. The second priority was, how do we get as many people in the stadium with that thought process in mind. Now, the only other variable that would complicate it a little bit is, what kind of blocks do you want? Do you want blocks of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc.? So working through our ticket and development office, we know that the majority of our ticket blocks are bought in blocks of 4 with a few 2s, but for the allocation process was going to happen in a tight time frame once we did the opt-in, opt-out. So we figured to focus on 4s, okay? And that would give a better yield ratio as opposed to 2s. So early in April and May, I started, messing around with it and doing different layouts. Different organizations were publishing their layouts. There were even companies that were trying to sell you their services. Hey, for $40,000, we'll come lay out your stadium. And I said, well, what a better time to add value to organization. We're locked up at home. I can print out some stadium schematics and start working on this. So literally, there was a couple of days I went to the stadium, did some measurements of, the average seat width, the average depth of a row, the rise of a row, and the average aisle width. All those things started factoring in, and then basically coming up with different formulas and applying my methods and seeing which would yield the best results. And it took a while. It took a lot of trial and error. I tried what I saw. I applied techniques others did, and then finally came up with our own method that worked for us. Because one of the unique things about our venue is, I don't know if people realize this, but especially in the lower level. So Sanford Stadium, row 1 versus row 60. Row 1 may be 24 seats wide, or row 60 may be 40 seats wide or 38 seats wide. So it's not just straight up rectangle that you can do a simple form. You've got to adjust as you go. So it really took a lot of trial and error, messing with different methods, and we found the most efficient layout, which is more of a staggered approach. So it's not just traditional blocks that you see going up, you see in some places, but it's a staggered, which will do a couple things. One, it'll use more rows, which will help spread out the groups between rows so people aren't walking through each other's much. But it'll also visually help create it look more full on camera because of the pattern. When people are all occupied in there, it'll actually look more. I think it'll probably look more like 30, 40, or even 45, maybe 50% once you see everybody in there the way it stacks in. So, but I can promise you.
What do you ballpark the attendance? I've heard numbers between 22 and 25,000, and then I know I've written about it a couple times, but for those that are going to the game, or those that are curious, what are going to be some unique things that they're going to notice about this stadium environment on game day?
I've got it projected right around 22% right now. We'll see what actually scans in, and then you've got to count up. There's some other factors in there when you count in the premium areas, workers, all those things factor into the normal attendance. So there are going to be a few things different this year, starting with the parking lot, right? So you got to show your ticket to get in the parking lot, as well as your parking pass. A lot of the setup as you go to the stadium will be the same. As you enter the stadium, you'll see the social distancing dots outside the gates that tell you how to line up 6 foot apart in front of the person in front of you. You'll be showing it on a mobile ticket, so that'll be different. Most, this is the first year where it's all mobile tickets. So having to pull up the ticket on your phone via either Apple Wallet or whatever your device is, having that ready. We'll even have some pedestal scanners at some of the gates that will allow you to just walk up and scan your ticket yourself and not have to interact or get close to an attendant. Once you get in the stadium, we'll be cashless at our merch stands and concessions. We will have a few what we call reverse ATMs, to where if you do show up with cash and not a credit card, you can go purchase like a gift card in increments of 20 or 30 or 40, because that's the only way you'll be able to purchase something at our concession stands. Again, you'll notice the social distancing dots outside the restrooms and the concession lines. Now, one thing that we're doing that's a little different than most of our peers is we went ahead and we're opening all our concession stands, even at 20%. A lot of venues I've spoken to are reducing their concession stands to 25 or 50% because of worried about losing revenue of a stand won't be as busy as normal. We felt that it was way more important to open them all up, even if it's a lot fewer flow or fewer people going through. That will allow us to do two things: give great service, and number two, allow people to spread out, and they won't have to bog down or get in a big line that could lead to gatherings or other issues. Additionally, we're opening every restroom. Early on, we even debated, and I know this is getting into the weeds, but we even debated, do we shut down every other urinal and try to promote social distancing? Well, when you really weigh it out, to us, it felt it makes more sense to keep them all open, let people get in and out faster. That way we have a less chance of a line bogging down outside, because we don't have a lot of room in our concourses. So it made more sense to leave them all open, get people in and out faster, as opposed to creating a line that's going to bog down in the concourse and could cause other issues with gatherings. We've eliminated some other gathering points. Like we're not going to have the pump catch-ups and mustard. We're going to do packets. The grab and goes will turn into serve and goes. We've stolen that concept from Augusta National, the grab and go, but we'll serve it to you to where you're not grabbing and getting, so that the things like the misting tents and refill stations, we've eliminated those just because we didn't want more gathering points. But you can still bring in one unopened bottle of water, 20 ounces or smaller, in. Fortunately for us, this first game, the temperatures are going to be between the 40s and 70s, so that shouldn't be much of an issue.
Going to say we caught a break there, Josh. Last year was pretty brutal.
Maybe we should start every home game, start October 3rd when the weather cools down a little bit every year. But then once you get to your seat, okay, and it's going to be clearly defined as a red chair back. The only groups that don't have chair backs will be the students, and we have vinyl wraps indicating where they can sit. But when you sit down, you're going to be provided a chair back, and that's to all of our donors. That's no charge. That's a sunk cost for us that will designate where they sit. And the beauty is, once you get to your block of 4 with your group, you've got social distance in every direction around you, and then you can take your mask off where you're sitting because you've got the distance and you're sitting outside. But then I think, it's not going to be the same quite insane electric atmosphere that you have for a normal Georgia Auburn game. But I'm confident the number will make noise. But I do think also your experience is going to be pretty unique and pretty special. You'll have room to stretch your legs, set your Coke down, your room to move about. The concession lines will be short. The restroom lines will be short. Ingress, egress, parking, traffic. So
yeah, traffic won't be so bad. You mentioned the experience, Josh, and I heard Kirby at his press conference today, actually it was after the game. I asked him about the crowd noise and the environment, and he said, well, the way they pump that crowd noise in, it was plenty loud. What does the SEC allow for, and what is the plan as far as the artificial noise that's going to be in Sanford Stadium?
Yeah. So there's a base level of ambient noise that they want every stadium to be at, and that really helps for the effect of the crowd and TV and making it sound good as it's played on whatever network. So there's a base level of 70 decibels that every stadium needs to have this basic background crowd noise, right? And then after a big play, you can crank it up to 90. When we score a touchdown against Auburn, we can crank it up to 90 and then bring it back down to 70. But then you'll still be able to play your music on top of that. Center puts his hand on the ball. The music has to turn off. But then on top of that ambient noise, we'll have our crowd of 20,000 plus in there making noise. And look, the people that are coming are, these are the people that are jacked up and excited to be there. They've opted in. They're ready to go. I promise you, I've been in enough stadiums like Louisiana Monroe where 18 to 20,000 can make a lot of noise. I guarantee you, with Auburn coming in, our crowd's going to make some noise. So combine that with the ambient noise we've got, I think we're going to make a lot of noise, and it's going to be a pretty exciting place to be Saturday night.
Josh, I want to move on real quick. Talk about that $80 million football building. You've been in the middle of that as well. I believe phase one is scheduled to be completed in spring of 2021. I don't want to push that. I know they've been on target. There were no missed days the last time we talked to you. I mean, this football building, this $80 million state-of-the-art football building, just kind of share some details. I know Michael's got a picture of that. It's amazing to see how far it's come and how it kind of sort of changes the skyline there around Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall just a little bit.
Yeah, I think my grass guy's upset with me. We keep creating more shadows. We keep building these big buildings and creating shadows on the practice fields. But no, this is going to be a phenomenal building. It was all about early on. We met with football, Josh Lee and Coach Smart, talking about this. It's about the student-athlete experience and how do we promote efficiencies? How do we improve their daily life, their operations around it? How do we improve their experience? And the first big key component of this was the weight room. So we're building a 24,000 square foot space that's a two-story ceiling that really gives them great space to work out in large groups at a time, which in this day and age, it's all about efficiency, especially with student athletes' time. So if we can work out more groups or bigger groups and larger groups at one time, we can give them the prime hours and give them back their day and give them better scheduling options as they try to schedule classes and study hall and practice and everything else. So that was one of the first key components. Then it was the locker room. Look, to be honest with you, our football team's been in the same locker room since the Butts-Mehre was built in the mid 80s. So that's the same space. So it hasn't grown, and the lockers have been refurbished, but that's been the same space since this Butts-Mehre, first opened. So this is the first massive major project when it comes to the true locker room space. So I think we're trying to create a space that our student athletes will want to spend time away from, just to be able to hang out, give them a second home. And then it's got everything else you can imagine, from the player lounge, the sports medicine, every bell and whistle you can imagine, the coaches' offices, meeting rooms. I mean, you name it. It's going to be a really special space that will give us so much more room to operate and just improve the experience from A to Z for our student athletes.
Yeah, it really creates a sense of community. I know that Clemson had a lot of success with their building. A lot of their players hang out. Dabo's talked about, hey, now the guys don't feel like they got to scatter. They hang out more around that building, and that does contribute to the team chemistry. That really does seem to be the trend. And, Josh, you've got an interesting background. We talked a little bit about it before the show, being a former LSU student and student manager, going all the way back to Jerry DiNardo. And then were you like the only guy that Nick Saban kept when he was hired? Maybe he didn't realize he was keeping you, or he would have got rid of you, because when Saban came in there, I mean, he leveled everything. How did you survive? And what was it like being a part of an LSU program with Nick Saban coming in there, taking over that program?
It was definitely a a whirlwind and just a massive shift in culture from the day he arrived. And luckily, I was paired with Coach Fisher. The very first spring practice, spring workout, whatever it was, and you could just tell. And look, I was 20 years old at the time, or 19, but even in the naive eyes of a 19-year-old, you could see that it was something special and something special was about to happen. And I just had a lot of faith in Coach Fisher and Coach Saban, and you could see what transpired there the next few years. And coming back to Georgia now, almost 4 years ago, I can see Kirby's footprint and how he has got the same plan and put that into place here, and how we're operating at a whole nother level now under his leadership. And it's impressive what he's been able to do here.
And you've been a couple other places, Millsaps and Louisiana Monroe. So you've seen this from a few different angles. You've seen schools maybe that don't have the resources. I'm sure that I'll tell you, your background is it's tailor-made for being an athletic director. I mean, Mark Hollis was a guy that was a student assistant under Judd Heathcote, worked next to Tom Izzo, and very comparable to what you've already been through, having been on the ground floor of an athletic department of a football program. And now the time that you've spent, not just with Kirby, but I really take note of your time as the director of football operations under Mark Richt. And, I had Mark Richt on this show earlier this summer. I don't know if Georgia fans really realize, just what a valuable role Coach Richt played in kind of getting this program in a really good position for that handoff to Kirby. And I don't think they know how much Mark Richt really Mark Richt really continues to support Georgia. I mean, he's really in the middle of this. I know Miami's his alma mater, but Georgia, and you worked with him. What experience did you take from that? Any similarities between Kirby and Coach Richt that you've taken note of, or maybe some interesting anecdotes that people might be interested in knowing?
Well, first of all, I can tell you both men are great men, and they care about the student athletes, and they really care about developing young men. And that's the number one thing I would take away from both of them. And I can't thank Coach Rick enough, because I wouldn't be here without him. It was the spring of 2008 when I was the director of ops at Louisiana Monroe, when he gave me a chance to bring me here and started my career at Georgia. This was always a special place to me. People don't believe it when I say it, but it was 99 when my first appearance in Athens. 1999, I was a student manager at Bernardo's last year. We came here to play, and I fell in love with Athens that day. I thought it was the most beautiful place I've ever seen. I thought the stadium, the red and black, I fell in love. And I told my best friend that day, I said, if I ever have a chance to work at Georgia, I'm going to go work there. And it was the spring of 2008. He was coaching football, got fired at the Dolphins, looking for a job. I wasn't even looking for a job. And he saw the job posted for football ops, and because he was a coach, and he said, you need to apply for that job. I said, Chad, you know how it is. When those jobs are posted, they're already filled. It's just a formality.
That's right.
When you said you wanted to work at Georgia, you have nothing to lose. You need to apply for that job. And I did, and the rest is history. But again, go back to Coach Smart and Coach Rick, just two great men that just care about their athletes, care about their development, who have unbelievably sharp minds of the game of football. And I think you have to thank everyone that came before you. I always say, every coach that came before, every administrator came before us. Georgia was here before us, and Georgia will be here after us. We're just the torchbearers in the process. And how do we do it justice in the meantime? But one thing I will touch on, Mike, that you mentioned about my background is I think it's important that, I was a coach. I was a grad assistant coach for 2 years. I was football ops for several years. And that's an important piece to bring to administration, because you've seen it now from a coach's point of view. And I think that can be helpful sometimes, because if you've never been on that side of the aisle where you're fighting for every win and the losses hurt and how hard you're working in recruiting, then you have a hard time understanding when a coach asks for X or Y or Z to help them in recruiting or help them in team travel. If you've never been on that side, you may not understand the why behind it. But when you've been on that side of the aisle, you understand that the coaches are looking for every edge they can to win and to recruit student athletes. So it's given me a great perspective as I've moved further in administration. When a coach does come to me, I understand where they're coming from. So hopefully that helps me in my career as I continue.
I would say probably. Were you still at LSU when Kirby was there?
No, we just missed each other.
Missed?
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to be interesting. I'll tell you, Josh, Greg McGarry, obviously he speaks very well of you, and Greg has done an unbelievable job for years and years and years. It looks like you've been the guy at the right place at the right time, and now the job that you've done helping Georgia be prepared for this weekend. I know the fans are really excited. I know Greg McGarry speaks very highly of all the work that you've done, and I know the fans are excited to see that come to fruition. Really want to thank you for coming on and sharing all those valuable details. And I got a feeling Georgia fans are going to be seeing and hearing a lot more of you in the future. Certainly, I want to get you back on the program as well.
Anytime, Mike. Anytime.
You got it. Josh Brooks, Senior Deputy Athletic Director at the University of Georgia, overseeing the $80 million football building, your weekend activities at Sanford Stadium, the tailgating that's not really tailgating so long as you have a ticket and you can get in the parking lot, you're good, and all the wonderful things that are going to take place this weekend. I want to take a minute before I bring my next guest on. I'm going to have an Auburn beat writer on. Gianna Hahn is going to join me from AL.com. But before I go to Gianna, I want to do this quick ad for my sponsors, Ingalls. You talk about people that helped us get through the pandemic and had to go through the ropes and jump through the hoops in terms of their planning to keep everybody moving along and getting supplies. It's Ingalls.
It's in our hearts to feel for you. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad. But we stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back with open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand. Community strong.
Can't see the screen. Am I live? Welcome back to the program. Mike Griffith here, and now joined by Gianna Hahn. Gianna covers the Auburn Tigers for AL.com. Auburn coming off a really big win. They're all big wins. No such thing as a small win in the SEC. Gianna, you were there for that Auburn-Kentucky game. What's the big takeaway on Auburn football?
So I have to say, I was rather impressed. I kind of expected more mistakes from them in their first game after a long break. They have a new offensive system. They have all these new starters because they lost some really big guys on both offense and defense. So I think like the biggest takeaway was that they were able to come away clean. They had almost no penalties. And then, of course, Bo Nix and everyone saw Seth Williams highlight reels kind of dominated. But their connection looked so strong in that first game, and Bo Nix looked so calm and collected. Another level than he did last year, because everyone talked about how collected he was last year in the Oregon game, but it's just a new level of confidence, that whole not a true freshman anymore. So I think that's the big takeaway, is that they just laid this great foundation way beyond what I personally was expecting. So
yeah, it was a big win over Kentucky. That's a game Kentucky squad, and I believe it's now 218 passes for Bo Nix without an interception. That's the second longest active streak in the nation to Trevor Lawrence. So Bo is a guy that, you know, and this is my old man moment for you, Gianna. I actually covered Bo's dad, Pat. I was the Auburn beat writer in 1993 and parts of 94. And I was there when Pat Nix famously came off the bench after Stan White was injured in the Iron Bowl, and Terry Bowden had him throw right to the end zone. Still to this day, one of the most amazing game calls I've ever seen for the 11-0 Auburn Tigers. And now here comes Bo, the legacy player who opened his career with a huge win over an Oregon team that otherwise probably would have been playoff bound. And you mentioned how settled that he is. When you talk about Bo Nix and the type of quarterback that he is, Gianna, what are the characteristics that give him a chance for that greatness that have started out maybe sort of a storybook career here, right? He's already got a win over Alabama. It's a good place to start if you're an Auburn quarterback.
I think exactly what you mentioned. Not only is his dad Patrick Nix, but his dad is a coach, and Bo is just such a coach's son. He knows like how it is. He understands the reasoning behind things, and that carried over into the offseason this year when they got a new offensive coordinator. We heard all about how Bo sought out Chad Morris when he was hired and sat down and had conversations with him. And then he was one of the few players we actually had access to during the pandemic. And he was saying he was taking all this extra time outside of the meetings they had to study that playbook because he understood like it was going to be on him. And so as we talked about in Oregon, he was calm and collected, but this year it's just this new level of confidence. I like to say that Gus Malzahn's fallback, I mean, it was a very true fallback, but whenever Bo messed up last year, he was like, well, he's a true freshman. And that's true, but he doesn't have that excuse anymore. And after this last game, it's almost like he won't need that excuse anymore. Because I mean, I don't know. I'm not an Auburn fan. I'm just the reporter, right? But I am personally just so impressed. Like I can't, It's just like beyond what I expected to be with him, because he just had such confidence and he looked like he knew what he was doing. He never panicked, even when there was a defender with his arms wrapped around the legs, and he still made a play for a first down over 10 yards, just through with his arms and absolutely no lower body strength. And then I think another thing that goes into it is when you talk to him, he's very confident, but not in uh like an overconfident, cocky way. It's just like this inner confidence that he seems to have. And I think he's just like exactly Patrick Nix's son, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So
No, there's a certain character, there's a certain charisma with a guy like a Bo Nix, and these guys, he's been the man for a long time. He's been groomed for this moment, and what a moment it is. Now I got to ask you, Auburn had 4 first-time starters on the offensive line, so I wouldn't have expected the offense to just blow things out of the water. What differences, though, Gianna, when we talk about last year's Auburn offense and this year's Auburn offense, are there some big changes or some different personality traits that you were able to pick up on?
there's just so many differences. Obviously, Chad Morris came from the same like offensive coaching, not tree, offensive coaching system as Gus Malzahn. He put a lot of that in, but it just has like this unique Chad Morris flavor. So first of all, when it came to the passing game, they were utilizing all levels of the field, which was not something you saw last year. They didn't really go to the middle of the field, and they had so many like shorter routes this year or in this first game, and they're very successful. So I think that's something that we're going to see more of. Tight ends, obviously Morris loves his tight ends, and while there was only one target to a tight end and one catch by a tight end, they were a lot more present. They were there every single game. Every single snap of the game. And we've heard that there's a lot more to come. One of the guys has been injured and they're hoping to get him back soon. So a lot more out of that. When you talk about the offensive line, not only did they have new starters, they had a lot of trouble over camp with COVID related issues and injuries. So they just really they're just constantly rotating all these guys in. So they didn't just have 4 new starters. They had a ton of untried people coming in. And so that might have led to the other difference that I was leading up to, is that there were only 91 rushing yards. And that's very, very unique for Auburn. Like Auburn loves to run you into the ground. And so it could be that they didn't play well, the running backs and the offensive line. It could be that might be the system. And it could be that the offense, like the passing offense was just clicking. So they're just going to that. I don't know enough about the offense yet. It's only one game. So I don't have a standard to compare it to, but say it looks very different.
And a lot of times it's how the defense schemes you up. Kentucky probably came in there and said, okay, we're going to load it up. We're going to make you beat us with your passing game. Let's see if you can do it, Bo Nix. And obviously Bo did good. Auburn +3 in the turnover margin. Really big factor there, I look at Gus Malzahn's stats, Gianna, and, I think a lot of this Georgia defense, I don't make a secret of that. They led the nation last year in scoring defense and rushing defense. They were 3rd in total defense, number 8 in pass efficiency defense, and they returned 80% of the production in 8 of the 11 starters. So I'm kind of looking at this going, hey, last year Auburn didn't score till the 4th quarter. I look a little bit closer, Gus Malzahn, 1-16 when Auburn doesn't score 20 or more points. This could be a challenge. How do you expect Auburn to be able to change things up? I mean, there's some explosive athletes, 1 and 2. I noticed they had 4 guys that opted out. How crucial or critical were any of those 4 guys that opted out?
So the top one that just sticks out to me right away was Chandler Wooten. He was a part of a 4-man linebacker rotation. He switched with KJ Britt, who's our all-SEC linebacker, and then Owen Popo and Zacoby McClain switched. So it was kind of a question, were they going to replace Chandler or were they going to go into a 3-person rotation? And it seems like they're going more with the 3 because all their other linebackers are really young and untried. Not only that, but Wooten was a big team leader, and he became an even bigger team leader over the pandemic. With all the Black Lives Matter stuff, he really took the lead with that. And you saw so many of his players just speaking up next to him. So that was kind of a big loss. But when you're talking about like the offense and their ability to adjust, I do think this is Chad Morris's offense now. Gus has made that clear. This is Like, he does have his own things that he throws in. He pulled out a few trick plays, but has so much respect for Morris. They're very clearly good friends, and he's letting him do his thing. So I don't know how applicable the stats are anymore, but I do think that Georgia does have a obvious advantage there when it comes to experience, just because the passing game, Auburn has a ton of experience, but just that run game, from the running backs to the linemen to the tight ends learning a new position, they might have a disadvantage. I don't know how that will play out, but when it just comes straight up to experience, there is a discrepancy there.
I guess, what is it, Anthony Schwartz? Is that the guy they call Flash?
Yes.
I know he went to high school with Tyson Campbell. Tyson said they raced. He didn't give us the result. I'm guessing that means Anthony won. What did you see them do with Anthony Schwartz? I know that's a guy that Kirby was really prepared for last year as well.
Yeah, so last year, obviously, he was coming off an injury, so he was limited. And they were really using him on shorter routes and just letting him try to find that gap and run. He didn't make too many big catches, like through the air. He might this year. He's talked a little bit about how they're changing up the way that they use him, but he is generally like slot. He does take a lot of those slant routes, but yeah, they kind of use him more for his speed after he gets his hands on the ball. But then again, now that I'm thinking about it, this past game, he did catch it and take it for pretty far. He almost scored a touchdown, but he was brought down right at the last minute. So it does seem like they'll be using him again. And he is fast. He is very, very fast. I covered KJ Hamler, who's always also very quick at Penn State, and people are asking me which one's faster. And I don't know, like, loyalty makes me want to say KJ, but this guy's another level. I mean, he ran track and he set I think a junior Olympic world record, not junior Olympic, junior national team. He set some sort of record for the US. So yeah, he's definitely a guy that once they figure out how to use him to his full capabilities, he can be a dangerous weapon.
KJ Hamler from Metro Detroit, I believe now in the NFL. Gianna, you do have a Big Ten background. You were able to cover Penn State and have some dealings with James Franklin, a guy that had a lot of success at Vanderbilt. How did Penn State and James Franklin compare you for SEC football, and what's it been like going from the Big Ten? I had a little return to Michigan State from 2012 to 16 before I came back down south. How would you contrast the Big Ten to the SEC?
Let me think about that one. So first,
you got a big stadium there. You got a big stadium. Now that Penn State, it doesn't look very congruent. I was in there once, and that was enough. I felt like the thing was going to fall in on me. But the stadiums are big. That's one thing that they certainly have in common.
Yes, for sure. So Big Ten is better at doing color outs than what I've seen, because Auburn tried a whiteout for my first game, and there were maybe 5 people wearing white. The games are a lot colder. And that was a whole debate. But I'm trying to think like how to put it into words. The style of play between Auburn and Penn State is actually kind of similar. Like, they almost matched up in the bowl game. They were that close. And I was very interested to see that, just because when you think about Auburn strengths last year, it was their defensive line, and you think about Penn State's strengths, it was defensive line. And how are they running the ball? They're running by committee. And how was Penn State running the ball? They're running by committee. So there were a lot of similarities. I can't say that like I looked at Big Ten as a whole, because I was so focused on Penn State, like as just a Penn State reporter. So there were similarities there. I feel like there's a different type of grittiness to the game, if that makes sense. This is why I'm having trouble putting words. It was kind of like an aura. I know that SEC people like to make fun of Big Ten a lot. And then Big Ten doesn't make fun of SEC quite as much, but it does feel a little more blue collar up there, I want to say. Maybe it's because of the cold and they're just putting their noses in the ground. But yeah, it's definitely, there's a different vibe to it. But Penn State, they do. I've heard the saying that it's a SEC school in the Big Ten just by the way it loves its football. So
No doubt. Happy Valley
sorry, I
is
was,
pretty incredible. Yeah. I mean, the tailgating and where it's located kind of out there, right? You think
mhm,
about the north or the northeast and you think about Philadelphia. It's like, no, that ain't this.
yeah.
This is its own small community, somewhat like Auburn used to. I see Auburn's actually grown up a little bit. It used to be a little bit more of an
Mhm.
outpost, a little harder to get to, like Penn State. And certainly the passion up there, it's big in college football. There's no doubt. I was surprised, Gianna, and I guess I'd want to get your reaction to this. The Big Ten, they put out a schedule and 1 week later they're out. It just doesn't seem like that the presidents as a whole are maybe as in tune with their football in the Big Ten as the SEC. The only thing I could come up with was just a terrible miscommunication disconnect between the presidents and the agents. What was your takeaway of this whole, I guess, fiasco? Maybe, I hope that's not too strong of a word, but let's face it, the Big Ten looked pretty awful for a while there.
Yeah, I don't think fiasco is too strong a word. I mean, the way that the coaches were just constantly asking for explanations, that threw me off because they're one of the most important shareholders, right? Um, and so for them not to have an idea of what's going on, and then of course the different reports coming out about, oh, well, there are this many athletes who had it that had heart disease, and then a different school saying, no, we found this, like that's nowhere near. Um, it was just really disappointing to see the way that they did that, and then the way they came back. Um, I'm not sure how I feel about them coming back, but I do wonder if they were going to cancel, if they should have at least seen how the SEC handled it first before they make decisions. I don't know. It just all everything about COVID has been we don't know the right answers, right? And I think this is another example of it. And it was another example of the different areas not communicating well, just like the different areas of the US are not communicating well with each other, but on a smaller scale. Um, I wonder if part of it is because not all the schools in the Big Ten are as athletics focused. So there might be a difference of like prioritization. And then another, I mean, I've been back home a bunch since the pandemic, and the difference between being in Maryland, being in Pennsylvania, and being here is just night and day. Like, so it's also the actual people who be going to the games and the players and all of them, they are probably looking at it differently than the people here. I don't know almost any of my friends who would be willing to go to a game back home. Whereas all the people I know here are like, woo, it's Saturday, like, let's go. So that's also, I think, another big difference.
Yeah, certainly a different political climate and definitely a different football climate when it comes to whether the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, right? What, the stadium's on fire? Well, what about my seat? Can I still get in? Or if there's no smoke on that side, let's do it. No, I follow you. I think you picked up on that quickly, Gian. And I guess I would ask you, you were at Jordan-Hare Stadium. By the way, it took me about a month to pronounce Jordan-Hare correctly before an SID pulled me aside and said, look, if you're going to cover the team, stop calling it Jordan-Hare. It's Jordan-Hare. How quickly, let me ask you, how quickly did you learn how to say Jordan-Hare as a new Auburn beat writer? And secondly, what was that experience like to be at the stadium last week?
So I actually wasn't in the stadium. I was out and around it. I was taking video, but
cool.
They gave the other pass for my organization to our columnists. So I will be at the Arkansas game. But
I'm not sure that's a prize, by the way, but go ahead, Gianna.
Yeah, I do. I am the youngest person, so other people have age over me. I never noticed the difference in how people were saying it. I thought it was just Southern accents. I have asked people if they thought I had an accent, because I remember one day I was on the phone with my friend and I was like, man, like adults with Southern accents, okay, but like little kids with Southern accents for some reason just get me. And she was like, you realize you probably have an accent to them, but they tell me I don't. So I don't know if they just didn't notice it or maybe I say it close enough, but I get made fun of for a lot of other things besides that. So
yeah, get used to it at Auburn. It's it's a place. It's a very unique atmosphere. When I was on the Zoom call last night, I felt like everything was an inside joke and I didn't understand what they were laughing about. But that's kind of how Auburn gets by in Alabama. When you got to contend with Alabama and you get beat down by the Alabama fans, And Alabama has that, at Auburn, they kind of circle the wagons. You probably already figured it out. They circle the wagons, and those fans are as loyal as any. And when they got their circle, and if I would say you've been accepted into that circle, Gianna. So I think you've done well in just a couple short years. Any predictions for this game before I let you go? Any feeling, any thoughts? I know it's very early, hard to draw conclusions, but anything you would tell us about a feel you've got for Auburn going into this Georgia game?
Yeah, so I worked a 14-hour day that day, so I didn't get to watch any other games, but I did read up on Georgia. I agree that it will be close, like the betting line is saying. And as you probably noticed yesterday, Gus doesn't talk about Georgia at all until Tuesday, so we don't have his take on it.
Right.
But I do think that the troubles that Georgia was having on offense, that could be a problem for them, because Auburn's defense lost 2 All-Americans, and they look good. Their first half was a little bit of a struggle, but the fact that they came back and held the other team to 1.7 yards per carry, that is, I think, a true testament to what Coach Steele has been able to do and just how deep that line is. Like, you can never have seen a guy and he's actually like so amazing and he just comes out of nowhere, right? But also, like we were talking about earlier, Georgia has some advantage in terms of experience when it comes to the offense. So I feel like it will almost be the opposite comparison from the Kentucky game, where it was like Kentucky's experienced O-line versus Auburn's defense. It's going to be Auburn's very experienced defense against Georgia trying to figure themselves out. So I can't come up with a number right off the bat. But I would say it's going to be like a 7.3-point game.
No, I think I would agree with you. Gianna, thanks so much for joining me. You're doing great work with AL.com. I mean, it's just a tremendous publication. I was really proud to work at the Mobile Register, which obviously kind of morphed into AL.com with Birmingham News and Huntsville. And the journalists that they've had gone through there are amazing. Izzy is a great friend of mine. We go way back. And obviously the fact that you have a job like this early in your career speaks very well for you. You have a great video presence, and really appreciate the information that you shared with us tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, it's sorry that the lighting in my apartment is so bad, but
no, it's kind of vogue. I kind of feel kind of hip, right? Like, I kind of like this. I might have to try this thing here. So, Miss Gianna Hahn, thank you, and look forward to meeting you down the road.
For
Good
sure.
stuff from Gianna. And folks, now we'll look forward. I'm looking at some of your questions. I'm kind of afraid to look at the thread here. You guys with the comments, I think I will wait until after the show to look at the comments. I hope you were nice, Ms. Hahn. We like to have different sort of folks on the Monday night show, different guests to give you some information. So you've all been good and you've all waited it out. So let's get down to some nitty gritty about Kirby Smart's press conference. I got about 5 minutes where I can fill you in. Kirby said that JT would be cleared. He is cleared. He will be ready to play. There will be competition between JT and Stetson Bennett. The one thing that Kirby said in his post game that I really latched onto was how important experience is. And it didn't take a genius to figure out what that meant. Now, in the same breath, you can expect to see more of Dwan Mathis this season. Kirby is not done with Dwan Mathis. He brought him in the game those last 8 minutes. Let me tell you, those repetitions were invaluable. Don't take those fourth quarter reps for granted. That's very important for a guy to be in the game, get those snaps, and get a feel for the action. And in Dwan's case, get a little confidence back. Let's face it, the players around him didn't do a great job. There were 8 penalties in the first quarter, 11 in the first half. There were a couple of really bad snaps. Trey Hill was really struggling. That is something to watch moving forward. Now, Dwan made some mistakes, no doubt. He got lit up. He took a college-level hit. Whatever brain surgery he had, whatever special helmet he was wearing, man, it got tested. Bumper Pool put a shot on him like I had very few seen. You saw Dwan right back in the game going at it again. So there were some good things from the poise. The body English stayed good. The kid went back in the game. I thought he showed some great mobility, enough that every team that's getting ready for Georgia now is going to have to be ready and say, you know what? They got a guy that can put in there that can make some things happen with his feet. You saw Dwan make some nice throws. There were some other throws, the interception. Kirby talked about that. Freshman Jermaine Burton, supposed to sit in the zone, kept running across, misread the coverage. This happens. That was Jermaine Burton's first game. He also made some really nice catches. So there were some growing pains that played out right before your eyes. But I'd say don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It was only game one for Dwan Mathis. It was only game one for Georgia. Thank goodness that game one is over with, because that first half was the worst look of Georgia football that I've seen in a long time. Defensively, Eric Stokes with a pass interference, prolonged what ended up being a touchdown drive. I think Georgia recovers. Whether it's Stetson, whether it's JT. My money would be on JT just because of JT's experience. JT has a big arm. The thing that Stetson cannot do that JT can do is stretch that field vertically. JT has an NFL strength arm. Stetson does not. Stetson is pinpoint accuracy. Stetson is get the ball out quickly. Stetson offers you a quarterback that can run. I was very, very impressed and somewhat surprised by Stetson mobility. He had the 2-yard scramble on a 4th and 2. On a 2nd and 10, he scrambled for 10 yards, and he had the conversion run. So I think Stetson brings you a little mobility, but what he doesn't bring you is that big arm. And if you don't bring the big arm, defenses are going to creep in. So Kevin Steele is a great defensive coordinator. Auburn's going to have a great plan. Georgia's got to solve that center problem. They got to get Trey Hill snapping. You can't have 2 or 3 bad snaps a game. You just can't do it. The running backs, I was disappointed. James Cook, he was a bust in game one. He's got to do better with the ball in his hands. He just, too many times he fell over without significant contact. He had 2 drop passes, a fumble. Got to see James Cook be James Cook. With a real James Cook, please stand up, because I know he's much better than what he played at Arkansas. Zamir White, short yardage, 3rd and 2, 4th and 1. Got to get those runs, Zeus. If you're going to be Zeus, if you're going to carry that legacy, you got to get that yardage. It was there. You got to find it. Let's see what questions you got. Last 3 minutes here. What do we got? Oh, boy. You guys are taking off on Gus Malzahn. I'm glad you guys like Gina. She really did a nice job. Young journalist from outside. I think that's great when you get somebody that comes in with a different perspective. She covered big-time football at Penn State. She had a very good high football IQ. I really enjoyed her comments. And I think she gave us some great perspective on Auburn as far as the Chad Morris differences that we're going to see. And Bo Nix. Bo Nix is a dude now. As much as Georgia fans love Jake Fromm until they didn't, they really love Bo Nix there at Auburn. Being a legacy player means a lot. Like I said, I was there when Pat Nix was there. And man, he was an incredible quarterback. Not the most athletic guy, not as athletic as his son, but a very cerebral guy. So if you take that cerebral nature of his dad and you put it in Bo, who's a pretty big, strong, physical guy, I think Bo Nix could be an NFL quarterback. I really do. I like what Tennille is saying about needing a leader, particularly on offense. Tennille, I totally agree. I thought Jamari Salyer did a nice job at left tackle. Hard to lead when you're an offensive lineman. Really need somebody in the backfield. I thought George Pickens, I thought he showed, a lot of maturity. Didn't see any issues with George. Thought he had 4 or 5 catches and a touchdown, getting double teamed the whole game. I like Georgia in this game. I know the line is 6 or 7. I think that's I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think that's a good bet. I really do. I think Georgia, you saw that stat I gave you, Gus Malzahn, 1-16 when his team doesn't score 20 points. I don't think they're going to score 20. I got him with maybe 17 at most. And I think JT Daniels, what we saw when Stetson came in with those air raid principles, spreading the ball, quick 5-yard pass, maybe somebody breaks a tackle. All of a sudden you get into a rhythm, and it's going to be pass to set up the run. This is going to be very different. You saw it at Arkansas, but you're going to see pass to set up the run now at the University of Georgia with these air raid principles, whether it's JT or whether it's Stetson. They will compete in practice, and Dwan will be in the mix. Again, I expect to see him again. It's 8:30. I've run out of my production time. I want to thank Josh Brooks. If you didn't hear the beginning of the show, you're going to want to rewind the Ingles on the Beat. Listen to what Josh Brooks says about the tailgating on campus. He gave us some provisions for folks that want to tailgate behind their cars, just no tents, no big parties. That ain't going to happen. But if you're in the parking lot, he talked about what the stadium was going to be like. And then, of course, Gianna Hahn gave us that interview on Auburn football and what we could expect from the Tigers and what she's noticed about Gus Malzahn and Bo Nix. So really want to thank you for joining me. I'll be back again Friday night. Friday Night Mike. We'll be doing a halftime show like we did last week. Everybody be safe. be smart, and have a wonderful week.